Omarosa Manigault Newman has been on NBC and CBS and PBS and repeatedly on MSNBC pushing her book denouncing President Trump as unhinged and rolling out one secretly recorded tape after another, such as this one, with the president after John Kelly fired her in the Situation Room.
Omarosa, what's going on? I just saw on the news that you're thinking about leaving. What happened?
General Kelly came to me and said that you guys wanted me to leave.
You know, they run a big operation, but I didn't know it. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Damn it. I don't love you leaving at all.
She called him a liar for pleading ignorance of her dismissal, and the president responded by saying the fake news media will be working overtime to make even wacky Omarosa look legitimate as possible, and also by calling his former aide a crazed, crying lowlife and a dog.
The president called you a dog this morning. What's your reaction?
I think that it just shows you that if he would say that publicly, what else would he say about me privately? He has absolutely no respect for women, for African Americans.
Joining us now here in Los Angeles, Ben Shapiro, editor-in-chief of DailyWire.com and a syndicated radio host and columnist. Christina Bellantoni, a former LA Times editor who now runs the media center at USC's Annenberg School of Communication. And Adrienne Elrod, a Democratic strategist who's been attending a lot of Hollywood parties here. Ben, a number of anchors have challenged Omarosa at times in these interviews, but at the same time, they are giving her a huge platform to condemn the president she once praised. What do you make of it?
Well, I mean, she's getting the strange new respect that accrues to anybody who's inside the administration, then leaves the administration and bashes the administration. And that's not particularly surprising. I mean, she's a story, obviously, but when half of the conversation is about a tape that doesn't exist or may not exist or we have no evidence of existing, that's where you start to get into troubling waters. Because the fact is, what she says that she heard, that's news. What she says that she has on tape, that's news. But it's not really news when you say that you may have heard that there may be a tape at some point that you may have heard, and then this becomes the cause of conversation for an entire week.
I agree with you fully on particularly on the last point. Are much of the media just sort of irresistibly drawn, not just to the drama of former Apprentice star, former senior White House aide, now turning on her former boss, but also kind of embracing her anti-Trump narrative?
I mean, that's part of it, right? But if anybody thinks it's surprising that Omarosa is getting attention, wasn't paying attention in 2004 when she was on the very first season of The Apprentice. This is someone who...
But that was a reality show.
Sure, and she's got first name only status. It became a huge headline when she joined the White House to begin with. So, of course, this is going to continue to drum up headlines. The president is feeding into that as well. So this is one of the things she knows how to do. She knows how to be provocative. She knows how to command attention. And she's even had a very orchestrated rollout of, well, here's this tape I'm going to play on this show, and here's this tape that I'm going to play on this show. And she's, you know, in command of this, and she's trying to sell books. I think we need to be frank that this is partly a commercial enterprise.
I'm going to guess that she's being successful at that. A highly orchestrated rollout. And just this morning on MSNBC, she said, I believe Trump wants to start a race war. But to what extent, Adrienne, has Trump's fuselage of insults against her, particularly the dog, the crazy and the wacky and all that, have they kind of boosted this story into the stratosphere, whereas otherwise it might have run out of gas after 2 or 3 days?
Yeah, of course, and I think maybe that's what President Trump is trying to do, right? He's trying
to give more attention to
well, I think he's trying to discredit her, and he's doing that in a very demeaning way. But look, typically somebody like this would not, a disgruntled staffer would not get this kind of coverage, right? The difference here is that Omarosa has known President Trump for 15 years. She's got tapes. Is a drip, drip, drip. Let's not forget when John Podesta's emails during the 2016 campaign were being released every day. That was such a media spectacle, right? The media was covering it like it was breaking news every single day.
I'm not saying it shouldn't be covered.
This is not too dissimilar.
It's a big story. The question is, why is it such a big story, and why is she able to
Because she has tapes, emails, and evidence, text messages that she's willing to drip, drip, drip out.
Well, Ben, when journalists say, they have her on, they say, well, why did you say such great things about him all those years? And she says, oh, I was complicit, I had a blind spot, but now I'm seeing the light. Do you think she's
magical? Funny how that works, right? As soon as she's fired, then she finally realizes that she had a blind spot.
But I think she's kind of getting a pass on that.
Of course she is.
It's kind of a stock answer.
Of course. I mean, look, the media are treating her with a great deal of respect when this is a woman who's been fired more often than an M4 in Anbar Province, right? I mean, she was fired twice by the Clinton administration, 3 times on The Apprentice, and now once by Trump. And undoubtedly, if she says something nice about him, he'll hire her back and then fire her again. So, you know, I don't think that we've seen the last of her. But
there could be a season 4, season 6.
Well, I mean, season 3 of Trump is awesome, and the writers of the season are fantastic. But I think that her guest starring appearance will not end here. She'll probably come back in a couple of seasons.
And not every single journalist is saying she's great and here's her platform. I mean, April Ryan has been very prominently talking about her, saying, like, don't use my name in all of this because, you know, I have done some serious reporting on this matter.
Right. But, you know, these tapes, and look, if she has actual tapes, and that's clearly news, and she has dribbled them out in very strategic fashion. But I haven't seen many question, well, the tapes are very selective. Are they being run together? Are they being edited?
Is this her best stuff? I mean, really?
Yeah.
Like, the tapes that we've seen are her being fired and then Lara Trump offering her money to join the campaign.
Which she describes as hush money.
Okay, well, you can describe it however you want, but it's
Right.
Lara Trump. It's not even one of the famous Trumps.
Well, usually if you leave an administration, you join a campaign, it's kind of expected that you're not going to say terrible things about the potential candidate.
Generally. I mean, you know, what we don't know about whatever tapes may or may not exist, we have to think about it. We all work in television, and we know that the cameras are always on, the microphones are always on.
Yeah.
We've seen Bill O'Reilly get caught in, you know, unflattering moments because somebody saved that footage. I mean, it is entirely possible that there are things out there that make everyone look incredibly, put everybody in an incredibly unflattering light.
What about Ben's point, Adrian, that the one tape that is getting the most attention is the one tape that we have no idea whether it exists, and it's basically a lot of speculation. And she's even given conflicting accounts of whether she heard it and someone else heard it and told her, but some people have denied that. The alleged N-word tape, which if it comes out, then it's a huge story. But right now, nobody's got any evidence of it.
Right, and I think I think there are plenty of people in the media who do want to keep this going because it is good for television. It is, you know, again, a disgruntled staffer who has known President Trump for a long time is coming out and making these allegations. But I do agree. I mean, eventually this tape has either got to come out or we need to stop talking about it and giving it the oxygen that she's trying to
So
give
we
it.
have a rare consensus on that. Right.
Yeah.
So does anyone care that she's a turncoat, or is that just sort of help the reality TV style storyline?
I mean, I thought that was actually her WWE role here, was to be the turncoat. I mean, she's the heel. She's doing the turn. So that's not any shock. But what is kind of surprising, I wouldn't say surprising, but what is, I guess, predictably annoying, is that so many members of the media are willing to drive a race narrative from everything that she is saying. So President Trump, for example, when he says dog, and everybody goes, well, that's a racial thing because he says dog. President Trump has called legitimately half the United States dog. Okay, right? He called Kristen Stewart in her relation with Robert Patterson a Doug. Right? This is his thing. He just says it all the time. And the media, because they are trying to drive the narrative that maybe the N-word tape is real and he's actually a racist, they're going to pick on that particular comment. Listen, is it bad he says that stuff?
Call a woman a dog. I mean, that's pretty bad.
Yes.
And
are we surprised?
none of it is shocking in the President Trump sphere.
This is exactly correct. Has anybody's opinion of Trump shifted like an iota in any of this?
Okay, well, I would just say that canine allusions aside, alleged, supposed, purported N-word tape aside, she was the highest-ranking African-American in the White House, and she's now saying she thinks he's a racist, and that we can debate his policy toward minorities,
yes, right.
but that part you can't completely take away. Let me move on to stories getting all kind of attention in the last 24 hours. New York Times reporting, citing a dozen unnamed sources, that White House counsel Don McGahn, so he's the lawyer for the president in the White House, spent about 30 hours talking to Bob Mueller's prosecutors during this Russia probe and providing invaluable information, according to the paper, ranging from why Jim Comey was fired to Trump's attacks on Jeff Sessions and all of that. Trump tweeted that he allowed this testimony, the interviews, I should say, and this is a fake story suggesting, to use a Nixon reference, that McGahn is a John Dean type rat. What'd you make of the story and the president's response?
Well, I mean, I think that we don't know, obviously, what McGahn actually had to say. And the truth is that any charges of obstruction would have to be so narrowly drawn. I mean, just as a lawyer, it's very difficult to prove obstruction against the President of the United States when he hasn't actually fired Robert Mueller, when there's actually been no allegation that he has actually stopped the investigation from moving forward in any particular direction.
But does this story move the ball forward?
I don't think so in a real way, because I think that if Trump were to then go around and fire McGahn, for example, or if he were to fire Mueller, then that changes the story dramatically. Otherwise, this just looks like another member of the Trump administration who's spoken with investigators. I know half a dozen Trump members of the administration who've spoken with investigators.
When you read that story, you know, the New York Times, obviously, because of its size and stature, you know, is an incredibly careful organization. When you read the way that sourcing read, it was very careful, it was very detailed and nuanced. it doesn't really matter what's going to end up being the result of the Mueller investigation.
Speaking of the sourcing, and by the way, Rudy Giuliani last night told Judge Jeanine the Mueller team is panicking, pointing to this story. They know they don't have a case. But my informed speculation is this came from the McGahn side, and here's why. There's a key sentence here that says McGahn, I'm quoting now, feared Mr. Trump was setting him up to take the blame for any possible illegal acts of obstruction, according to people close to him.
Right.
That doesn't sound like a prosecutorial leak.
It sure doesn't.
Let me read you just a few of the half-dozen tweets from the president this morning. Adrian, Mueller makes Joe McCarthy look like a baby. Media even worse. Some media members, he says, called him, the president, to complain and apologize about the story. Presumably these were allies of the president. He took a shot at the disgusting new board member at the New York Times. This is the editorial writer, Sarah Jung, who has a history of racist tweets. And he took an aim at the two reporters and the Times who wrote the story. The Times is defending the two Pulitzer Prize winners, Maggie Haberman and Mike Schmidt.
Yeah.
Who he's talked to at numerous stages.
Yes, he
both of them have gotten interviews, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, Maggie Haberman is one of the best in the business, as we all know, and she's also somebody that President Trump is constantly seeking approval of.
Right. But he is taking the story seriously because he's repeatedly trying to knock it down.
Right. And look, I think the point that is important to make here is whether or not he granted Don McGahn the ability to speak to Mueller. The fact that Don McGahn, the White House counsel, is speaking to Mueller. That is what is so newsworthy about this.
The president says it's with his permission. All right, let me get a break. When we come back, the media ripping the president for yanking John Brennan's security clearance, and he hits back along with the rest of them. Trump knew he'd provoke a media firestorm by yanking the security clearance of Barack Obama's CIA director, and most pundits proclaim that he was simply retaliating against John Brennan, who had called his Putin press conference nothing short of treasonous. The MSNBC contributor hit back first in a New York Times op-ed and then with Rachel Maddow.
I'm not shocked, quite frankly, at all the appalling things that Mr. Trump has done. And so I think this is an egregious act that flies in the face of traditional practice, as well as common sense, as well as national security. I think that's why there's been such a outcry from many intelligence professionals.
There's no silence. If anything, I'm giving him a bigger voice. Many people don't even know who he is, and now he has a bigger voice, and that's okay with me because I like taking on voices like that. I've never respected him. I've never had a lot of respect.
Ben Shapiro, Brennan is getting a bigger voice. There's been thunderous media condemnation of this move. And I understand the criticism that it just looks petty. But all these Obama guys, Brennan, James Clapper, and others, they've said in interviews that they never used this clearance since leaving office because the administration never calls them in to consult on anything. So while this is clearly political, is it also kind of symbolic?
I think it's clearly symbolic. I think that the one area where it could have some actual ramifications is, let's say that there was somebody who was inside the CIA or FBI who called one of these guys up and conveyed to them classified information. Normally that'd be a crime. If they have a security clearance, it's not a crime. So withdrawing the security clearance could theoretically present some actual consequences for that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But look, of course this is a political thing. To pretend that it's not is silly. And it also just shows how inept the administration is at handling political things. Because if it had been a prior administration, they would have said, oh, we just have a new policy now where we give affirmative security clearance to people who we're going to talk to, as opposed to, we're going to pick these particular people we don't like and remove their security clearances.
On that point, Adrian, Donald Trump often comes out and admits his motive in interviews, regardless of the official spin. So he tells the Wall Street Journal about moving against Brennan. I called it a rigged witch hunt. It's a sham, and these people led it. Very duplicitous, not good people. So he's not even pretending there was any sort of fig leaf reason for doing this.
Yeah, typical Trump, right? That's kind of how he handles these situations. Look, I think the media coverage on this is very warranted because it is the principle of the situation, right? It's the fact that the former director of the CIA is being stripped of his security clearance only for political purposes. It doesn't matter if the administration is not consulting with former Obama officials who had the security clearance. What matters here is that Trump is taking away their security clearance for political purposes, and that is why the media is giving this so much oxygen.
Let me ask you to hold up because I want to get to this other story, which I'm asking you as a former newspaper person. So the other day, 400 newspaper editorials were published, all of them hitting the president over the issue of free press, freedom of speech, not the enemy of the American people. This was started by a Boston Globe editor. The Globe says he's sending an alarming signal. The journalist can be treated as a domestic enemy. Fayetteville Observer in North Carolina manipulating reality to get what he wants. Columbus Dispatch, a calculated effort to obfuscate the truth. When I heard about this, I thought, well, these papers are walking into a trap because they're going to seem like what Steve Bannon called the opposition party. Your take?
I completely disagree with that. First of all, this is a very alarming moment for this country, and the American people and everyone on this planet should be concerned when there is any attempt to silence, control, restrict, intimidate the free press, right? It is one of the foundations of our democracy, and they should be that way just as they were when Barack Obama, then a candidate, kicked conservative newspapers off of his airplane at the very end of the campaign.
But my point,
when I was covering it, working for a conservative newspaper. So the idea, the LA Times wrote this very clearly. They did not join in because they decided that they didn't want to violate the sort of independent spirit of an editorial.
Let me actually read from the LA Times editorial, which said that while it might agree with the substance, the president himself already treats the media as a cabal. Why give them ammunition to scream about collusion? My issue, Adrian, is not that every one of these editorials newspapers has the right to say this. To do it all on the same day, was that a smart strategy?
I thought it was a very smart strategy because, number one, we're talking about it, right? So that was effective in itself. And number two, I agree with Christina. This is an unprecedented situation that we have right now with President Trump, this constant assault on the media, this constant assault on the free press. So if you want to make an impact, go out collectively together and use your collective voice, and that's what these newspapers did.
How is it different from changing your profile picture on Facebook to have, whatever we stand with, whatever the issue of the day is, right? This is an industry that is saying we stand together to collectively have a voice on something in individual ways. Each of those editorials was written from a different perspective,
But they all were published on the same day, and President, just as I was predicting, said collusion, said opposition party.
What's the purpose of it? I mean, President Trump, his purpose is to defend President Trump, and his credibility with people who like President Trump is very high. The media's purpose is theoretically to have credibility with everyone, and they are demonstrating once again that for one side of the political aisle, they're not going to boost their credibility. There's no one on the right who looks at this and says, you know what, I'm so glad they're standing up in coordinated fashion, because the whole problem is that we felt that they're acting in coordinated fashion with regards to politics. I mean, they never did anything like this after the AP was bugged, after James Rosen, after any of that stuff during the Obama administration.
Right.
Only here they decided they want to make a move.
Again, these newspapers have every right to speak out on the subject of free press. I just thought it was a misstep to do it all on the same day. Some of you disagree. Christina Bellantoni, Adrian Elrod, thanks very much. Ben, stick around for the next segment. Ahead on Media Buzz from Los Angeles, the president says social